He drove the ammo truck, a forgotten hero in a world that had moved on. His days were filled with the rumble of diesel, the clatter of crates, and the endless expanse of muddy tracks. But one day, a chance encounter with a high-ranking general would rip open a past he desperately tried to bury, revealing a secret that would shake the very foundations of their understanding of courage. What was hidden in that dusty glove box, and why did its discovery force a decorated soldier to confront the ghosts of his most harrowing battle? Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The engine of the M915 rumbled a low, guttural protest, a familiar symphony to Tom "Tank" Briggs. It was a sound that had accompanied him through countless sun-baked deserts and monsoon-drenched plains, a constant companion in his solitary world of logistics. Today, the base was a quagmire, a sprawling canvas of churned earth and standing water, reflecting the leaden sky in murky puddles. Rain, relentless and unforgiving, had been falling for 3 days straight, transforming the usually dusty roads into treacherous sucking bogs. Tom gripped the oversized steering wheel, his knuckles white, as the heavy truck fishtailed slightly, its massive tires fighting for purchase. He was on his way to Depot Alpha, another routine run, another load of crates filled with the lethal necessities of war, another anonymous contribution to the machinery of conflict. Tom, a man whose frame seemed to have been forged from the same sturdy steel as his truck, preferred the anonymity. His uniform, perpetually stained with grease and mud, was less a symbol of rank and more a testament to his chosen profession, a uniform that blended him seamlessly into the background of the sprawling military installation. His face, etched with lines that spoke of more than just age, was usually set in a stoic expression. His eyes, the color of worn denim, perpetually scanning the road ahead, or perhaps gazing inward at landscapes only he could see. He was known as Tank, not for any aggressive combat prowess, but for his sheer, unyielding reliability, his ability to haul anything, anywhere, through any conditions. He was the guy you called when the mission absolutely, positively had to get there, come hell or high water, or in this case, come hell and high water. The air in the cab was thick with the scent of diesel, damp canvas, and the faint, metallic tang of ammunition. He had just navigated a particularly deep rut, sending a spray of muddy water arcing over the hood when he spotted the figure by the side of the road. A tall, imposing silhouette, even beneath the wide brim of a rain-soaked cover, stood patiently, a duffel bag at his feet. As the truck drew closer, the insignia on the collar became clear, glinting faintly through the gloom, a constellation of stars that instantly signaled a presence of significant authority. General Sawyer. Tom's first instinct was to drive past. Generals didn't hitch rides in ammo trucks. They had staff cars, escorts, and an entire motor pool at their beck and call. But the general simply stood there, unmoving, his gaze fixed on the approaching vehicle. There was no imperiousness in his posture, only a quiet expectation. Tom sighed, a puff of warm air escaping his lips, and eased his foot off the accelerator, the truck's massive brakes hissing softly as he brought it to a slow, grinding halt beside the general. The passenger door, stiff from years of neglect and exposure to the elements, groaned in protest as Tom pushed it open. "Need a lift, General?" he asked, his voice a low rumble, devoid of any particular deference or familiarity, just a simple, direct question. General Sawyer, a man whose reputation preceded him like a thunderclap, was known for his sharp intellect and even sharper wit. He possessed an aura of quiet command, his silver hair neatly cropped, his uniform immaculate despite the downpour. He nodded, a slight, almost imperceptible dip of his head. "That would be most appreciated, Sergeant," he replied, his voice surprisingly mild, carrying a hint of a gravelly warmth. He hoisted his duffel bag with a practiced ease, tossing it onto the floorboard before climbing into the cab. The interior of the truck, usually a solitary domain, suddenly felt smaller, infused with the general's formidable presence. As General Sawyer settled into the worn passenger seat, the faint scent of his crisp, clean uniform mingled with the truck's usual odors. He adjusted his cap, then turned to Tom. "Heading to Alpha, I presume?" "Yes, sir," Tom confirmed, shifting the truck into gear. The N915 lurched forward, its tires churning through the mud, the rhythmic thud of the engine resuming its familiar beat. The general was quiet for a moment, his gaze sweeping over the utilitarian interior of the cab, taking in the faded dashboard, the array of gauges, and the small, personal touches, like the worn baseball cap hanging from a hook and the thermos cradled in a makeshift holder. "Rough conditions out here," he observed, not as a complaint, but as a simple statement of fact. "Always are, General," Tom replied, his eyes fixed on the treacherous path ahead. Mud's a constant companion in this line of work. A comfortable silence settled between them, punctuated only by the groan of the engine and the splash of tires through puddles. Tom had expected a barrage of questions, perhaps about his route, the cargo, or the state of the roads. Instead, the general seemed content to simply observe, his presence a quiet, watchful one. After a few minutes, the general shifted, reaching out a hand towards the dashboard. "Mind if I, check the map?" he asked, his fingers hovering near the glove box. "Help yourself, General," Tom grunted, not taking his eyes off a particularly deep rut that threatened to swallow the front tire. He rarely used the glove box himself, preferring to keep his essential documents tucked into a folder beneath his seat. It was mostly a repository for forgotten odds and ends, a few spare fuses, a worn-out pair of work gloves, and whatever else had accumulated over the years. The general clicked open the latch, the small door dropping with a soft thud. He rummaged inside, his fingers brushing against a few loose papers, a pen, and then something solid, wrapped in a faded, olive-drab handkerchief. His fingers closed around it, and he pulled it out, unwrapping it slowly. As the fabric unfurled, a dull gleam of gold and enamel caught the dim light filtering through the rain-streaked windshield. It was a medal, heavy and ornate, suspended from a pale blue ribbon adorned with 13 white stars. The bronze eagle, clutching an olive branch and a bundle of arrows, was unmistakable. The general's movements stilled, his eyes widening almost imperceptibly. He held it up, the medal swinging gently, catching the light. "Who gave you this?" General Sawyer's voice was different now, stripped of its earlier mildness, replaced by a tone of profound, almost reverent inquiry. His gaze, sharp and penetrating, fixed on Tom. Tom didn't flinch, didn't even glance away from the road. His voice, when it came, was flat, devoid of emotion, as if discussing the weather. "They pinned it on me after Op Hammerfall. Never liked to talk about it." The words hung in the air, heavy and unexpected, like a sudden shift in the wind before a storm. General Sawyer stared at the medal, then at Tom, a complex tapestry of emotions playing across his weathered features. Disbelief, dawning recognition, and an almost overwhelming sense of awe. Op Hammerfall. The name resonated with a chilling familiarity, a dark chapter in the annals of military history. A brutal, desperate engagement that had been whispered about in hushed tones for years. And this unassuming mud-splattered sergeant, the man who hauled ammo crates, had been there. Not just there, but at its very epicenter, performing an act of valor so extraordinary it had earned him the nation's highest military decoration. General Sawyer carefully rewrapped the Medal of Honor, placing it back into the glove box with a reverence usually reserved for sacred relics. The silence that followed was different from before, no longer comfortable, but charged with unspoken questions and a profound sense of revelation. He studied Tom, truly studied him, seen beyond the grease and the grime, past the stoic facade of the truck driver. He saw the quiet strength in his hands, the unwavering focus in his eyes, and the deep, almost palpable weariness that seemed to cling to him like a second skin. "Op Hammerfall," the general repeated, his voice barely a whisper, as if testing the name on his tongue. "I remember the reports. A complete disaster almost. Until—" He trailed off, his mind already racing, piecing together fragments of information, trying to reconcile the legend with the man sitting beside him. The official accounts had been sanitized, the heroics often attributed to a nameless, faceless unit, the details blurred by the fog of war and the need for operational secrecy. But the Medal of Honor? That was different. That was specific. That was undeniable. Tom offered no further explanation, his gaze still fixed on the muddy track. He had said what he needed to say, no more, no less. For him, the medal was a burden, a tangible reminder of a day he wished to erase from his memory, a day filled with unimaginable horror and the ghosts of comrades lost. He had tried to bury it, literally and figuratively, in the deepest recesses of his truck's glove box, hoping it would remain unseen, forgotten, just like the man who had earned it. The rest of the drive to Depot Alpha passed in a strange, almost surreal quiet. General Sawyer, usually a man of decisive action and direct communication, found himself uncharacteristically speechless. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, piecing together the fragments of the Op Hammerfall reports he had read years ago, now viewed through the prism of this astonishing discovery. He knew the official narrative, the grim details of the ambush, the desperate fight for survival, the critical objective that had almost been lost. He remembered the commendations, the quiet acknowledgments of exceptional bravery, but never a specific name attached to the Medal of Honor recipient from that particular engagement. Security classifications, perhaps, or a deliberate attempt to let the hero fade into the background, as many preferred. As Tom expertly maneuvered the massive truck through the narrow, winding lanes of Depot Alpha, the general's gaze remained fixed on the man. He noticed the subtle tremor in Tom's hands as he downshifted, the way his jaw tightened imperceptibly when the truck hit a particularly rough patch. These weren't signs of weakness, but rather the subtle indicators of a man who carried a profound weight, a quiet testament to experiences that transcended the mundane. When they finally pulled up to the loading dock, a hive of activity even in the pouring rain, General Sawyer unbuckled his seatbelt. "Sergeant Briggs," he said, his voice regaining some of its usual authority, but now imbued with a new layer of respect. "Thank you for the ride. And for the revelation." Tom merely nodded, his eyes meeting the general's for a brief moment. There was no defiance, no pride, just a weary acceptance. "Any time, General," he replied, his voice still flat. General Sawyer stepped out of the truck, the rain instantly plastering his uniform to his frame. He paused, looking back at Tom, who was already preparing to oversee the unloading of his cargo. The general knew, with a certainty that resonated deep within him, but he couldn't let this go. A Medal of Honor recipient, driving an ammo truck, living in self-imposed obscurity. It was a story that demanded to be understood, a heroism that deserved to be acknowledged, even if the hero himself wished otherwise. Back in his office, a sterile, orderly space that stood in stark contrast to the chaotic mud and grime of the base, General Sawyer immediately set about his task. He dismissed his aide, a young, eager captain who looked bewildered by the general's sudden intensity. "Get me the classified files on Operation Hammerfall," he commanded, his voice sharp, decisive. "Every single document. And specifically, I want the full commendation report for the Medal of Honor recipient from that engagement." The captain, accustomed to the general's precise demands, saluted smartly and disappeared. General Sawyer leaned back in his chair, his mind replaying the scene in the truck. The dusty medal, the quiet revelation. Never liked to talk about it. Those words echoed in his ears, a poignant testament to the hidden burdens carried by those who had witnessed the worst of humanity and performed the best. Hours later, the captain returned, a thick, red-tabbed folder clutched in his hands. "Sir, these are the highest classification. They require your personal authorization to access." "Understood," General Sawyer said, taking the folder. He waved the captain away, then closed his office door, the click of the lock echoing in the sudden silence. He settled back into his chair, the heavy folder resting on his desk, its contents holding the key to Tom Briggs's past. He opened the folder, the crisp pages rustling softly. The first few documents were standard operational briefings, maps, intelligence reports. Then came the after-action reports, grim and unsparing in their details. Operation Hammerfall, as he remembered, had been a critical push to secure a vital supply route through a heavily contested valley. The objective was clear: the stakes impossibly high. A convoy of medical supplies and reinforcements, crucial for a besieged outpost, was to pass through. The reports detailed the ambush. It wasn't just an attack, it was a meticulously planned slaughter. Insurgent forces, far more numerous and better armed than anticipated, had sprung a trap in a narrow defile. The lead vehicles were instantly obliterated, blocking the path, turning the convoy into a sitting duck. The air, according to the reports, had become a maelstrom of gunfire, explosions, and screams. Casualties mounted rapidly. Communications were jammed. It was chaos, pure and unadulterated. General Sawyer read on, his eyes scanning the dry, military prose, trying to visualize the horror it described. And then, he found it. The detailed account of the Medal of Honor action. The name was there, stark and undeniable. Sergeant Tom Briggs. The report described how Sergeant Briggs, then a young, relatively inexperienced soldier assigned to a support unit, had been driving one of the rear vehicles, a fuel tanker. When the ambush hit, his truck, miraculously, was not immediately disabled. Instead of seeking cover, instead of retreating, he had done something extraordinary, something almost suicidal. He had reversed his massive fuel tanker, not to escape, but to create a barrier. Under a hail of enemy fire, with bullets ripping through the metal of his cab, he had deliberately maneuvered the volatile vehicle to block the insurgents' line of sight and provide a desperate shield for the pinned-down medical corps. Vehicles behind him. The report detailed how he had then, still under intense fire, climbed out of the cab, grabbed a discarded machine gun, and laid down suppressive fire, drawing the enemy's attention away from the wounded and the medical personnel. The narrative continued, painting a vivid, horrifying picture. Briggs, alone, exposed, had held his ground, emptying clip after clip, buying precious minutes for the medics to tend to the wounded and for the remaining soldiers to organize a desperate counterattack. He had been hit multiple times, the report stated, but had refused to fall back, even after sustaining grievous injuries. He had seen a medic pinned down, bleeding out, and without hesitation, had crawled through a hail of bullets to drag him to safety, using his own body as a shield. He had then returned to his position, continuing to fire until his ammunition ran dry. It was only when a small, hastily assembled quick reaction force finally broke through the ambush that Briggs had collapsed, bleeding profusely, his uniform shredded, his face blackened with smoke and grime. He had saved dozens of lives, the report concluded, directly contributing to the eventual repulsion of the enemy and the successful, albeit delayed, delivery of critical medical supplies. His actions were described as beyond the call of duty, selfless, and heroic in the extreme. General Sawyer closed the folder, the weight of the documents pressing down on him. He felt a profound sense of humility, a deep respect for the man who had performed such an act of extraordinary valor, and then a pang of shame. This man, a true hero, was now driving an ammo truck, his sacrifice and bravery largely forgotten by the institution he had served so bravely. Never liked to talk about it. The words now held a deeper, more poignant meaning. It wasn't just modesty, it was the quiet suffering of a man haunted by the memories of that day, a man who had seen too much, lost too much, and perhaps felt the weight of survival more acutely than the pride of heroism. The next morning, the rain had finally abated, leaving behind a crisp, cool air and a landscape still glistening with moisture. General Sawyer sought out Tom Briggs. He found him in the motor pool, meticulously inspecting the tires of his M915, a wrench in his hand. The general approached him slowly, deliberately, his footsteps crunching on the gravel. Tom looked up, his expression unreadable, betraying no surprise at the general's presence. "Morning, General," he said, his voice as neutral as ever. "Sergeant Briggs," General Sawyer began, his voice softer than usual. "I've read the reports." Tom's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He didn't look away, but his grip on the wrench tightened, his knuckles turning white. "Sir?" "Operation Hammerfall," the general clarified, his gaze steady. "The Medal of Honor commendation." A flicker of something, perhaps discomfort, perhaps resignation, crossed Tom's eyes. He straightened up, wiping his hands on a greasy rag. "It was a long time ago, General." "It was an act of incredible bravery, Sergeant," General Sawyer countered, his voice firm but not accusatory. "You saved lives. Many lives. You risked everything." Tom turned away, his gaze sweeping over the rows of military vehicles, as if seeking solace in their silent, metallic presence. "Just doing my job, sir, like everyone else." "No, Sergeant," the general insisted, stepping closer. "Not like everyone else. Most men, faced with that kind of overwhelming fire, would have sought cover, would have retreated. You drove into it. You became a shield. You fought back when all seemed lost. That's not just doing your job, Sergeant. That's heroism." Tom remained silent for a long moment. The sounds of the motor pool, the distant rumble of engines, the shouts of mechanics, filling the void between them. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost a whisper, laced with a raw emotion that surprised the general. "You don't understand, General. You weren't there. The screams. The smell of burning flesh. My friends, they didn't make it. I saw them die. I saw things no man should ever have to see. That medal, it's not a badge of honor to me. It's a reminder. A constant, heavy reminder of what I lost, of what I couldn't save." His voice cracked slightly on the last words, a rare glimpse into the profound pain he carried. General Sawyer listened, his expression softening. He understood now. It wasn't a lack of pride. It was the crushing weight of survivor's guilt, the indelible scars left by trauma. "I understand, Sergeant," General Sawyer said gently, his voice filled with genuine empathy. "I truly do. War leaves its marks on all of us, in different ways. But what you did, Sergeant, it was still extraordinary, and it still matters. It matters to the families of those you saved. It matters to the men and women who serve today, who look for examples of courage and selflessness." Tom finally turned back, his eyes, usually so guarded, now held a flicker of something akin to vulnerability. "What do you want, General?" he asked, his voice weary. "You want me to give speeches? To parade around? I just want to do my job. Drive my truck. Be left alone." "No, Sergeant," General Sawyer replied, a faint smile touching his lips. "I don't want you to do anything you don't want to do. But I do want you to know that your actions were not forgotten. Not by those who know the truth. And not by me." He paused, then continued. "And perhaps, Sergeant, it's time you stopped carrying that burden alone. There are people who understand, people who can help." Tom looked skeptical, his gaze distant, lost in the echoes of the past. "Help me forget?" he scoffed softly. "No one can do that." "No," General Sawyer agreed. "Perhaps not forget. But perhaps help you to live with it. To honor the memory of those you lost, not by burying your own heroism, but by acknowledging the extraordinary man you are." The conversation ended there, a quiet understanding passing between the two men. General Sawyer left Tom to his work. But the encounter had irrevocably changed something. For Tom, the general's words, though unsettling, had also planted a tiny seed of possibility, a faint glimmer of hope that perhaps, just perhaps, the weight he carried might one day lighten. For General Sawyer, it was a stark reminder of the hidden depths of courage within the ranks, and the profound responsibility of leadership to recognize and honor those who served, even when they preferred to remain in the shadows. Over the next few weeks, General Sawyer subtly initiated changes around the base. He didn't make a grand announcement about Sergeant Briggs, respecting Tom's craft, desire for privacy. Instead, he began to highlight the importance of all roles within the military, from the frontline combatants to the logistical support staff, emphasizing that every cog in the machine was vital, and every individual contribution held immense value. He started a program to connect veterans with mental health resources, framing it not as a weakness, but as a strength, a way to process the unique challenges of military service. He made it clear that seeking help was a sign of courage, not cowardice. Tom, meanwhile, noticed the subtle shifts. The conversations around the motor pool, seemed to carry a different tone, less focused on rank and more on mutual respect. He found himself, on occasion, approached by younger soldiers, not with questions about his past, but with a simple, genuine, "Thank you for what you do, Sergeant." It was a small thing, but it chipped away at the wall he had built around himself. A wall constructed from years of silence and self-imposed isolation. One particularly sweltering afternoon, Tom was wrestling with a stubborn engine component, his brow furrowed in concentration, when General B.I. Sawyer appeared again. This time, without the formality of a full uniform, dressed in a simple field jacket. He leaned against a nearby toolbox, observing Tom's methodical work. "You're a good mechanic, Sergeant," the general remarked, his voice casual. "Comes with the territory, sir," Tom replied, grunting as he finally loosened the bolt. "Can't haul ammo if the truck's broken down." "Indeed," General Sawyer said, then paused. "I've been thinking about Op Hammerfall. Specifically, the medic you pulled out. Private First Class Jensen, wasn't it?" Tom froze, his hand still on the wrench. The name, spoken aloud, was like a sudden, sharp jab to a long-healed wound. "Jensen," he repeated, his voice barely audible. "Yeah. Good kid. Didn't make it, though. Died on the way to the aid station." A wave of profound sadness washed over Tom as he spoke the words. He had carried that particular memory, that specific failure, like a stone in his gut for years. He had saved Jensen from the immediate danger, but he hadn't saved his life. The medal felt like a hollow mockery in the face of that loss. "He didn't die, Sergeant," General Sawyer said quietly, his voice firm, breaking through Tom's painful reverie. "Private First Class Jensen survived. He was severely wounded, yes, but he recovered. He was honorably discharged a year later. He's a civilian now, working as an EMT in his hometown." Tom slowly turned, his eyes wide, disbelief warring with a fragile flicker of hope. He lived?" The words were a ragged whisper, a question he hadn't dared to ask himself for years, a question he had answered with a grim, certain negative. "He lived, Sergeant," General Sawyer confirmed, a small, knowing smile on his face. "Thanks to you. His family wrote a letter of commendation, actually. Said you were the reason he's still alive." The revelation hit Tom with the force of a physical blow. All these years, he had carried the crushing weight of Jensen's death, believing his efforts had been in vain, that his heroism had been incomplete. The guilt, the grief, the sense of failure had been a constant companion. And now, in a single sentence, it was lifted, replaced by a dizzying sense of relief, a fragile, trembling joy. He sank onto a nearby crate, the wrench falling from his hand with a clatter. His eyes, usually so dry and distant, suddenly glistened. I didn't know," he mumbled, his voice thick with emotion. They told me he didn't make it." "Sometimes, in the chaos of battle, information gets muddled," General Sawyer said, his voice gentle. "Or perhaps, you were in no condition to receive it clearly yourself. You were severely wounded, Sergeant." Tom nodded, remembering the blinding pain, the hazy faces, the distant sounds of sirens. He had been fading in and out of consciousness, his body screaming in protest, his mind a jumble of fragmented images. It was entirely possible he had misheard, or simply hadn't processed the information. The general sat down beside him, offering a rare moment of shared vulnerability. "You see, Sergeant, your actions had a profound impact, a positive one. You saved a life. You gave a family their son back. That's what that medal truly represents. Not just the horror, but the hope, the resilience, the extraordinary capacity for good, even in the darkest of times." Tom remained silent for a long while, processing this new, astonishing truth. The heavy burden he had carried for so long, the one that had made the Medal of Honor a symbol of pain rather than pride, began to dissipate, replaced by a lightness he hadn't felt in years. Jensen lived, a life he had saved. It wasn't just a grim memory anymore. It was a living testament to his courage. "Thank you, General," Tom finally said, his voice hoarse with emotion. He looked at the general, a genuine, unburdened look, the first true smile touching his lips in what felt like an eternity. It was a small smile, but it held a world of gratitude and a nascent sense of peace. The general simply nodded, a quiet acknowledgement of the profound shift he had witnessed. He knew this was just the beginning of Tom's journey, but it was a crucial first step. The process of healing, of accepting one's past, was long and arduous, but now Tom had a reason to embark on it. He had a life, a real, tangible life, that he had saved. From that day forward, a subtle but significant change began to manifest in Tom. He still drove his ammo truck, still preferred the quiet solitude of the open road, but the impenetrable wall around him seemed to have crumbled, brick by painful brick. He started engaging in casual conversations with his fellow drivers, sharing a joke or a story, something he hadn't done in years. His eyes, though still carrying the echoes of past trauma, now held a flicker of warmth, a hint of the man he might have been before Op Hammerfall. General Sawyer continued his quiet mentorship, occasionally seeking Tom out for a chat, not about the war, but about the mundane realities of base life, or the intricacies of truck maintenance. He ensured that Tom was aware of the various support groups and counseling services available, never pushing, but always making the option clear. He also made sure that Tom's service record, particularly the details of Op Hammerfall, were properly documented and recognized within the appropriate channels, not for public fanfare, but for the sake of historical accuracy and internal acknowledgement. One evening, Tom found himself in the recreation hall, a place he usually avoided, preferring the quiet of his barracks. He was nursing a cup of lukewarm coffee, listening to the chatter of younger soldiers playing pool, when a familiar face approached him. It was Sergeant First Class Davies, a grizzled veteran who had served in multiple deployments, his own share of scars, both visible and invisible. "Heard you had a chat with the general, Tank," Davies said, his voice gruff but not unkind. Tom grunted, taking a sip of his coffee. "Something like that. Heard he was asking about Hammerfall," Davies continued, his eyes piercing. "Rough one, that. Lost a lot of good men." Tom nodded slowly, the familiar ache returning, but now it was accompanied by a strange sense of clarity. "Yeah, it was." Davies leaned closer, his voice dropping. "There were rumors, you know, about what happened out there. About one guy, a driver, who held the line. Never knew who it was. They kept it quiet." Tom looked at Davies, a silent acknowledgement passing between them, a shared understanding of the unspoken codes of military life. "Some things are better left unsaid," Tom murmured. But this time, the words didn't carry the same bitterness. "Maybe," Davies conceded, "but some things deserve to be known, especially when they save lives." He clapped Tom on the shoulder, a rare gesture of camaraderie. "Good on you, Tank. Good on you." The quiet acknowledgement from a fellow veteran, a man who understood the true cost of war, meant more to Tom than any formal ceremony ever could. It was a validation, a recognition from someone who had walked a similar path. A few months later, General Sawyer was preparing for a major base-wide inspection. He was reviewing personnel files, ensuring everything was in order, when he came across Tom Briggs's file again. He paused, looking at the commendations, the service record, the quiet details of a life dedicated to duty. He noticed a recent entry. Sergeant Briggs had volunteered to mentor new recruits in vehicle maintenance and defensive driving techniques, a role he had previously shunned. It was a small detail, but it spoke volumes. Tom was slowly, tentatively, stepping out of the shadows. He wasn't seeking fame or recognition, but he was finding a new purpose, a way to share his invaluable experience, to prevent others from facing the same dangers he had. He was no longer just a man haunted by the past. He was a man building a future, one lesson, one shared experience at a time. General Sawyer smiled, a genuine, heartfelt expression. He knew that the Medal of Honor in Tom's glove box would likely remain there, a private symbol of a personal journey. But it was no longer a burden. It was a testament to a quiet, enduring courage, a story that, though rarely spoken, resonated deeply within the heart of the military, a reminder that heroism often wore the unassuming uniform of an ammo truck driver. The seasons turned. and the mud of the base eventually dried, replaced by the dusty, sun-baked earth of summer. Tom "Tank" Briggs continued his routine, the M915 still his faithful companion, its engine still rumbling its familiar tune. But something was undeniably different. The silence in the cab was no longer heavy with unspoken grief. It was simply the quiet of a man at peace with his work, with his past, and with himself. He found himself looking forward to his runs, not just as a duty, but as an opportunity. He started noticing the subtle changes in the landscape, the way the light shifted over the distant hills, the resilient wildflowers pushing through the cracked earth. These were observations he hadn't allowed himself to make before, his mind too consumed by the ghosts of Op Hammerfall. Now, with the knowledge that Jensen had lived, that his sacrifice had indeed made a difference, the world seemed to open up, revealing small pockets of beauty he had long ignored. One afternoon, while waiting for his truck to be loaded at a remote outpost, a young private, fresh-faced and eager, approached him. "Sergeant Briggs, sir? I heard you're the best driver on base. Any tips for handling these beasts in the mud?" Tom, instead of his usual terse reply, offered a rare, genuine smile. "Patience, Private, and knowing your vehicle, she'll tell you what she needs." He then proceeded to share a few practical tips, demonstrating a technique for navigating particularly deep ruts, his hands moving with the practiced ease of years of experience. The young private listened intently, absorbing every word. This small interaction, a simple exchange of knowledge, filled Tom with a quiet satisfaction. He wasn't just hauling ammo anymore. He was passing on wisdom, helping to shape the next generation of soldiers, ensuring they were better prepared for the challenges ahead. It was a form of service, he realized, just as vital as any other. General Sawyer, maintaining his subtle oversight, observed Tom's transformation with a quiet sense of triumph. He saw the way Tom interacted with others, the subtle shift in his posture, the newfound lightness in his step. The general understood that true leadership wasn't always about grand gestures or public accolades. Sometimes, it was about recognizing the quiet heroes, understanding their burdens, and helping them find their way back to themselves. He had even, on a few occasions, seen Tom in the base library, a place he had previously considered alien territory. Tom wasn't reading about military history or strategy. He was poring over books on mechanics, engineering, and even, surprisingly, a few on horticulture. It seemed he was not only embracing his current role, but also exploring new interests, expanding his horizons beyond the confines of his truck cab. One day, a new, younger general, General Albright, arrived on base for a tour of inspection. He was known for his meticulous attention to detail and his sharp, inquisitive mind. During his visit to the motor pool, he paused by Tom's truck, noting its immaculate condition despite its age and heavy use. "Who maintains this vehicle?" General Albright asked, his voice crisp. "Sergeant Briggs, sir," the motor pool commander replied, gesturing towards Tom, who was tightening a lug nut on a tire. "He practically lives in it." General Albright approached Tom, his gaze assessing. "Sergeant, this truck is in remarkable condition. You take pride in your work." "Yes, sir," Tom replied, straightening up, his eyes meeting the general's. There was no longer any hint of the guardedness that had once defined him. "I've been reviewing some of the older records," General Albright continued, his voice lowering slightly. "Operation Hammerfall. I understand you were involved in that engagement." Tom felt a familiar tightening in his chest, but it was quickly replaced by a sense of calm resolve. He no longer flinched from the name. "Yes, sir. I was there." "The reports speak of extraordinary valor," General Albright pressed, his eyes searching Tom's. "A Medal of Honor was awarded for actions during that operation. The recipient's name was redacted in some of the public summaries." Tom simply nodded, a quiet acknowledgement. He didn't offer details, didn't boast, didn't even hint at his own involvement. He had made peace with his past, and he didn't need external validation. General Albright studied him for a moment longer, a flicker of understanding passing through his eyes. He recognized the quiet strength, the profound humility that often accompanied true courage. He didn't push further. He simply extended a hand. "Sergeant Briggs," he said, his voice imbued with a new respect. "It's an honor to meet you." Tom shook his hand, his grip firm and steady. "Likewise, General." As General Albright moved on, General Sawyer, who had been observing the exchange from a distance, approached Tom. "You handled that well, Sergeant," he remarked, a knowing glint in his eye. "Just told him the truth, General," Tom replied, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Nothing to hide anymore." General Sawyer clapped him on the shoulder. "Indeed, and that, Sergeant, is the greatest victory of all." The story of Tom "Tank" Briggs, the unassuming ammo truck driver with a Medal of Honor tucked away in his glove box, became a quiet legend on the base. It wasn't shouted from the rooftops or celebrated with parades, but it was known, whispered among the ranks, a testament to the fact that heroes walked among them every day, often in the most unexpected guises. Tom continued his work, his days filled with the rumble of his truck, the scent of diesel, and the camaraderie of his fellow soldiers. He was no longer defined by the single horrific day of Op Hammerfall, but by the sum of his experiences, his quiet strength, and his unwavering dedication. The medal remained in his glove box, a private reminder, no longer a burden, but a testament to a life lived with courage, resilience, and an enduring spirit. He had driven the ammo truck, and in doing so, he had driven himself, slowly but surely, back to peace. He was still Tank, the reliable driver. But now, he was also Tom, a man who had faced the abyss and emerged, not unscathed, but whole.